Interesting piece of history. I'm glad you told us.
Yes, that was so. And Albert was also the first one that owned Lawn Station. And Jack lived there. Jack Dominic then. They moved from the Ridge and lived at Lawn. And I think I've sent those snaps up again. I'm not sure. I'll have a look in the old book, showing the front of the house at Lawn. And I remember Jack building it, and the centre pole to hold the house up was a tree, about 12 or 15 inches in girth, I should say. And that took the weight of the roof, you know.
Tremendous.
Yes, yes.
There's one point I'd like to ask you. Did they pronounce Marilla Street or Morella Street when you was there?
Ah, well, we didn't call it a street. I never ever knew the name of the streets. One was the cleared line, and that was the main street.
Oh, I see.
And there was a tree of knowledge where they crossed, and a board was nailed up there, and little items of interest to the townspeople was nailed up on that. That was the tree of knowledge.
Tree of knowledge.
If there were meetings coming off, the notice was tacked onto the board, or whatever. Mm.
Now, I heard you say a few minutes back Marilla Street, and I was just wondering if that's the way it was pronounced back there.
Well, it might have been, but I can't ever remember calling it a street.
There's a little bit of contention at the moment on that question.
I
That's
see.
why I'd like to get the early ideas.
Well,
That's going from the pub up to the dooley.
Well, what about getting in touch with the department that has the naming of streets? It would be registered.
Oh, yes, it would be, true.
If you really wanted to get to the truth of it.
Truth of it.
I think you went to Sydney and went to the department that covers the naming. I forget what they call it just now. But they would have a record there.
Now, when you went there, the Bruces had been there a long time.
Oh, yes, there was son Bruce and his family. I was there when Ivy Bruce died of meningitis. As a matter of fact, we visited them, my mother-in-law and I, we visited them when Ivy died to offer our
I think
condolences.
if you could tell us something about the earlier days of the Bruce family, and because...
Well, we didn't know the Bruces all that much, other than we were neighbours, you know, in a neighbourly way. And there was son Bruce and what was his boy? Ivy died, and then there was the younger boy. What would his name be? He began as father, I think.
Artie.
Artie Bruce, that's right, yes, Artie.
And there's Bob.
And Bob Bruce. Can't recall Bob very much, but I remember Artie.
Bob is still alive.
Is he?
Going quite well.
Ah,
So
yes.
if you come to the Ridge again...
Yes, I must see these old hands, yes.
He's a very interesting gentleman.
Do you know if there's a painting of the Ridge in the bowling club rooms?
Well, I don't go down to the club very much. See, I don't drink, and
No.
so I couldn't tell you.
Well, my granddaughter, she painted a painting of twice as long as that and a little wider in proportion. And Betty and Guy, that's the last time I was up there, they took it up because they'd been as a I suppose really a matter of giving their thanks to the club for treating them so well on previous occasions. And it was just before the extensions, they were going to do extensions to the club, and they said, well, we won't hang it now, but when the extensions are made, we'll hang it in a prominent place where everyone can see it.
You can rest assured it would be.
Yes, so I was just wondering whether they had. It was really a nicer painting than that, better colouring. Mm.
Now, coming back to the opal and the opal fields, can you remember any rushes taking place while you were there?
Oh, well, there were, but we weren't involved very much in digging, and I don't suppose I took so much notice, really. There was the pony fence, called after Pony Fence Jack, you know, there were these characters.
Very good. Now, this is what we want to know. What do you know about Pony Fence Jack?
Well, I don't know anything about him. Other than what I just heard, he was Pony Fence Jack, and that he lived in the Pony Fence Rush was called after him. There used to be old bag boots. He always lived up on the Nobbies, it's the end of the cleared line.
Yeah.
You knew about old bag boots?
No.
Oh, well, legend had it that He was a very big storekeeper in Tamworth, and his wife cleared off with someone, and the shock of it turned his brain. Anyhow, he ended up at Lightning Ridge, and I don't think he had very much money to spend, but he never wore boots. He made boots out of bag, and that's why it was called bag boots. And he would come down to the store when I was there, and he'd have a halfpenny worth of salt and a penn'orth of flour, a penn'orth of sugar, and that's how he'd dole his money out. But he was a reticent type of man. He never had much to say. A small man, if I remember rightly, very clean looking. You could see he'd been used to better days.
Yeah.
Then there was Praying Jimmy. You knew about him?
No.
Well, Praying Jimmy was another character. He would write letters to God, and he would tear them up into little tiny pieces. Then he'd get on his bike and he'd ride furiously along the road or in the bush, and he'd throw this paper up in the air. That was sending it up to God. That was his.
What did he actually look like?
Oh, I can't remember now. Just a normal man about your size, I would say, if I remember rightly. Then there was old Jackie Neighbour. We'd had severe floods and the town was running short of food. And there was talk of trying to get a drop from an aeroplane of food. And Jackie Neighbour used to say, "Well, if here's a bloody hairy plane coming," he said, "you'll know it's the Truman Tucker." But I don't know what him, I suppose poor old Jackie died. And there was the Pink Lady. You've heard of the Pink Lady?
Tell us about them.
Well, the Pink Lady was, she used to have a few gentlemen visitors, shall I say, but scrupulously clean, kept to herself. You never heard any coarseness from her. As a matter of fact, I used to have her do my washing with the 3 children, you know. She used to come down and do the washing, and very clean in her personal appearance.
Do you know her name, what her name
No,
was?
I never ever knew her name. She was never called anything else by people but the Pink Lady.
And whereabouts did she live at the...
Well, she lived 3 or 4 doors down from the hotel in a little cottage.
Towards the Dooley?
Toward the Dooley, yes,
Yes.
toward the Dooley.
Yes, there's a little cottage still there now that a chap by the name of Leonard's ended up living in.
Oh, yes.
It may have been the same.
Leonard, would he be from Angledale Station?
Yeah.
It's a funny thing, you know, he and my husband weren't the best of friends. And my husband had a cattle dog, and Leonard said he was used to go over and kill the sheep. And my husband said he didn't. But Leonard always reminded you of a character from the Wild West. He wasn't bearded, but he had 2 or 3 days shave, whiskers on him, and he wore a scarf around his neck and a broad-brimmed hat. But he always reminded you of a character from a Wild West story. Anyhow, sure enough, our dog was over there one day and he shot it, killed it, because this infuriated my husband. And met him uptown one day, and Leonard used to drive a spring cart in. And my husband was pretty fiery-tempered, and he loved to fight, you know. Anyone could tell you that, he loved to fight. In fact, he wanted to take it up professionally, and his father wouldn't let him. However, he saw Leonard this day, and he said, "You shot my dog, Leonard." He said, "I'll get you for this." And he went to jump up onto the back of the spring cart, and as he did, Leonard whipped the horse. And my husband did a somersault back onto his head, you see. So that ended it anyhow. The best thing you could do is forget about it. Yes.
There must have been a lot of other characters if you could only remember them.
Oh, there were, but, you know, over the years, it's a long time.
Did you know the Turner family?
No, I didn't. Now, someone asked me, the girls asked me, did I know the man they called the Hornet? He wasn't there. See, we've left 54 or 5 years since I'd left the Ridge or more.
You left in the late 20s?
Yes, about 27, I think. 26 or 27 we left there.
You actually left.
So this man that built this house of mud, as Joan, I think, explained it to me, was called the Hornet because he had a mud house. But he came there after we'd left. So in that intervening 50 years, I wouldn't know anything much.
What about Bob Bishop? Did you know Bobby Bishop?
No.
None of the bishops?
No. There was Jack Souter.
Well, what do you know about Jack Souter?
Jack Souter used to be the secretary of the hospital committee. There was Joe Bavang, the Bavangs.
Right.
I think his sister married a policeman. He was afterwards stationed at Gadooga. I don't know what happened to Joe, but he was...
Joe died only about less than 20 years ago.
Oh, yes, yes. He was the town simpleton, poor
Yes,
Joe,
yes,
you know.
yes,
But harmless.
yes.
The boys used to torment the soul case out of him until they infuriated him so much that he would attack them then. But if they didn't interfere with Joe, he wouldn't interfere with them.
Was the Graham brothers there when you were there?
No. There was Jack White, the Whites.
They worked the water puddler, didn't they, at the 3 Mile, the horse puddler, the Whites?
Oh, they might have done afterwards, but at that time Jack used to sell the water to the townspeople. He'd get it from our tank, buy it from us and then sell it at his price to the townspeople. He had a mother and sister that I never ever met. They were very quiet people, never mixed, never went anywhere. Mm.
And who were the policemen those days?
Well, there was Grimes and Nowland. No, Nowland, I forget who was. I can't remember his name, the second policeman there under Grimes. But when Grimes left, Cox came. Cox and Nowland. And Nowland was a very sensitive type of man, and he didn't approve of everything that Cox used to do. Mr. Cox used to grow tomatoes in tins and fertilise them with human excreta. And Nowland, you needn't think I'm going to eat those. No, you wouldn't think of it. But however, there was a couple at the Ridge, they were down at the 3 Mile, I can't think of their name, but the wife gave birth to a stillborn baby, and the husband took it and threw it down a 60-foot hole. Well, the nurse Hulbert, was a nurse then, the BNA nurse. She was called in to see to the wife, and she hadn't seen the baby, but she had to report to the police that the baby had been born. So she reported it to Mr. Cox, and he in turn went down to see this man, and he said, "I believe your wife had a baby, stillborn." He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, where is the body?" He said, "It's down at the foot of the 60-foot hole, and if you want it, you dig it out." So the police had to dig it out. And they got the little body, and they brought it back to the police station, and they put it in a hamper. Hampers were used then, you know, hamper baskets of clothing and that. So he put the little body in a half a hamper, and Nowland said, "Where do you think he put it?" And we said, "We don't know." He said, "Under my bed." Now, he knew that would upset Nowland.
Yes.
And anyhow, there was an inquiry, but nothing came of it. It was all right. But Nowland afterwards, he married Florrie Brown, one of the Brown. She was the eldest of a family of 11 at the time, and I think just before we left, Mrs. Brown had another baby, and it was a little girl. But all in between were boys. Some of the boys are there now. Tiny,
Yes, yes.
is it Tiny?
Yes, yes.
And I've forgotten a lot of their names, naturally. Well, Nowland then was afterwards, once he married Florrie Brown, he was moved from Lightning Ridge, and I think he was to Cumbria Chance and various places, but he finally ended up at Tamworth, and he committed suicide by drowning himself. He was in full uniform, and the body was in 4 feet of water when they found it. There was nothing wrong with his books, and they could never understand why he committed suicide.
Amazing.
Yes.
What did you know about Freddie Bodell?
Well, Fred and my husband, I knew Fred before we were married. They were great. They were card players. They played a lot of poker together. Freddie, I understand, lived to be a great age too.
He died somewhere around the middle 70s.
Yes.
In his 90s.
Yes, fancy that.
In his 90s. But we'd love to know as much as we can
Well,
about
I
his
can't tell you
personality.
much about Fred Bedell because I knew him by sight, but I never mixed See, I was never a drinker or anything. I never went to the hotel. Well, women didn't go to the hotel then. And so that there were a lot of the miners there that I really didn't know, so not coming in contact with them.
And what about some of the old German miners? There were plenty of those.
Well, there
then.
was, I'm trying to think, it was old Bill the Boar. He was,
Well, tell us about it.
he was a Boer. And he was also a good chef because at race time they would get him into the hotel to cook for the race meeting, for all the visitors. And one night they had a session at the hotel, and Bill got very much the worse for drink, but he thought it was time he went home. And Papa Francis lived across the road from the hotel, and he had a big bush house, I suppose as big as this room if I remember. And Bill the Boar thought he was on the 3 mile track where he lived, and he went in the gate and he went round and round and round, but they said by the bike track he must have been riding as long as he thought he was going to the 3 mile, as long as it took him to go there. And they found him asleep inside the shed next morning, and he knew that he hadn't gone home, you see. Then there was, who was another funny one? Oh, Papa Francis, of course. He always called his boys, Villy, you cow camel, you. It was a great saying, a cow camel. And those boys, Rowley Heath, of course. Well, the Heath boys and the Francis boys used to go out rabbiting again. And the Francis boys, being German, that was their food, they took raw meat sandwiches, and the Heath boys took ordinary ones, and when they got out they used to change over. The German boys would take the Australian fillings, and the Heath boys would take the raw meat ones. Yes.
Tremendous. George Lowe was an old German. He was there many years.
Yes, I didn't know him.
You didn't know him? Didn't know any of the Yorkies?
No, they came afterwards. Yes. Papa Francis, his wife left him, you know. Didn't you know that? Is that on?
Yes, tell us all about it.
All right. Well, she's a very pretty girl. You've heard of Dick Huggard? Haven't you?
No.
Oh, well, they must have been before your time, but Dick Huggard and Kitty Huggard, they were Irish. And Kitty was a very pretty Irish girl, and she married Papa Francis. She had Willie and Jack. Well, she left them. There was another overbuyer named, I just can't recall it, although it's at the back of my mind. However, she cleared out with him, and they went to America. And Tom Brady was over there, and I think it was in San Francisco. He met Kit Huggard in the street one day, and she had a beautiful opal on her. And after he said hello, he said, "My word, that's a beautiful opal on you, Kit. Where'd you get that? How'd you get that into the country? Did it cost you something?" Oh, she said, "Not so much." She said, "I worked in with the purser, and we got it through for nothing." You know, he reported her to the authorities, and there was a court case. Oh, she was pregnant to this opal buyer. There was a court case, and the purser got 9 months for smuggling in the opal, helping to, and she was found not guilty because of her condition. Yes.
There's some interesting stories in
Yes.
Lightning Ridge.
Oh, yes.
Can you remember anything about the opal robbery that took place?
No.
You
Before
can't-
my time.
Before your time,
Yes,
yes.
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 Yes, I remember that. I've heard since that the old man Darby was involved in it somehow, but nothing was ever. And I
didn't know that.
I never ever heard. It was supposed to. It was in one of the books. I read it myself. Hidden them under some tree somewhere, but they were never ever found. There was the hospital committee. There was Mr. Cox, the policeman, officer in charge. There was Albert Dominic, Papa Francis on the committee, and Jack Souter. Jack Souter was secretary. And for some reason, they took a dislike to Nurse Hulbert, a very competent woman. However, they tried to get rid of her. Well, they couldn't get anything on her that she hadn't done right. So, in the finish, they began smearing the gate as she came, her gate into the hospital grounds. As she came out through, she'd get human excreta on her hands. Yes. And this went on time and time again, that in the finish she wouldn't go through it. But she was determined. She said, I've done nothing to send in my resignation about. She said, I've done nothing wrong. And she said, I don't see why I should. So the hospital ground was just enclosed with a wire netting, a low wire netting fence. So she used to have to put a box and get over the fence that way. She couldn't go through this ground. Well, then they set up men to watch the front gate to see if they could find out who was doing it. And nothing came of it. They even smoothed the ground over on the at the bottom of the gate and around the gate to see if they could get footprints. No footprints. So finally they found, Jack Souter was always going to Mr. Cox and asking him, can't he find out who was doing it? He was the policeman. It was his place to find out who was doing it. And Cox would say, well, we'll trap him, Jack, don't worry, we'll finally trap him. But nothing came of it for a long time. So Jack Souter then went to Cox. He said, well, now, Cox, this has been going on too long. This woman's being persecuted for nothing. He said, if you don't do something about it, he said, I'm going over your head. He said, I'm going into Walgett to Sergeant of Police. Well, he said, leave it a while, Jack, I'm sure we'll catch someone. So they left it for a little while, and Souter went again to see, and he said, well, what are you doing about this? Oh, he said, we caught someone doing it, Jack. And Jack said, what did you do about it? Kicked him in the backside and let him go and told him not to do it anymore. And it hadn't been done anymore. But it turned out that these three committee men, Papa Francis, Albert Dominic and Cox, would go to a toilet and get human excreta into a can and make it sloppy and pour it all over the gate, and they were the perpetrators. That's why he never caught anyone.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yes. So she was there for some time after we left the place. But and before Nurse Hulbert came, was a nurse. My children, the eldest and the third one were born in Walgett, but we were flood-bound when Betty was due, and I had her at home, and this nurse confined me with Betty. And after she left, she went to Brisbane and she became a nun, a nursing nun in Brisbane.
The B&A was maintained by monies raised in the town, or did the government?
No, the government, I think.
The government.
Yes, the government did.
There was a claim at the 3 Mile called the B&A claim. Somebody told me that claim was something to do with getting money for there.
Well, that might have been something personal by someone, repaying them perhaps for looking after him. You never know.
You never know.
But as far as I know, no, we didn't, as far as I remember, I don't think we raised money this way. It was just, the committee was to see that it was run properly and that the people were attended to properly and that sort of thing. Yes.
It proved a wonderful blessing, that B&A.
Oh, it's marvellous. They've had one up here at, until recently, until the health business has all changed around. They had one up at Mangrove Mountain for years.
They've just recently, when I say recently, in the last 10 years at Lightning Ridge, changed over to the Health...
Well, the Health Commission.
Yes,
that's right, yes.
When we went to Lightning Ridge many years ago, the B&A was invaluable.
Oh, you had to have it because it was 50 miles into Walgett.
Walgett, yes,
Yes.
yes. What do you know about Walgett? What can you remember about Walgett in your days at Lightning Ridge?
Well, my husband's aunt lived in Walgett, Mrs. Bill Coleman. Max Coleman is one of the sons today, he's still living, and Bill Coleman. I'm not sure whether Bill has died or not of late years. But, Walgett was just a little old, quiet town. There was the wool scour, and that's where the Colemans lived, and Bill was employed there. He didn't manage it, but he looked after it and looked. When the manager would go away, well then Bill was in his place.
What about Cumbora?
Cumbora, my husband had an uncle living at Cumbora, and he had a beautiful orchard in the sand hills. The trees were beautiful. I suppose the sand would hold the moisture. And we were going over there with a team to play tennis one Sunday, and just about this time, because the stone fruit were coming in, and George's uncle, we went over and we went there to see him, and he was talking about his beautiful fruit trees and the beautiful peach he had. I remember he called it the King Edward VII peach, and I thought, oh well, we'll be lucky to get some peaches to take home, you know. So he took me down to show me this tree, and he gave me one peach. So that was our share of the stone fruit.
Now, could you describe what Cumbora looked like? Was there hotels, shops, or what was there those days?
Well, it was just a little one-horse town, little place, not much at all. Probably more there now than ever. But there was the Mrs. Wilby Brown. Did you know about her? Well, she had a hotel. She used to have a hotel at a place called Wilby. And
Can you tell us where Wilby is?
Well, I don't know whether it's up around Moree or that way. I'm not sure. However, she was a tough character and was reputed to have shot a man. And anyhow, she had this. What's the other place that's near Cumbora?
Growan.
The Growan, that was it. She took over the Growan Hotel, and people were frightened of her. I remember before I was married, she'd come over to Lightning Ridge to stay at the hotel, and when she wanted to pay Mrs. Wars for her night's fees, Bertha would run her. She'd come to me. She said, "I'm not going to face up to her. I'm frightened of her." And she'd literally hide behind a door while she was there. And I used to have to take a check and the money, whatever.
What did she look like?
Well, just a normal woman as far as we knew. But anyhow, she had this little hotel at the Growan, and we used to hear all sorts of yarns coming from the Growan Hotel. But she was found dead. And there was inquiry into her death. It seems that she was bitten here on the arm above the elbow, and that is a place they say it's impossible to bite. You can't reach it. However, a man from a station, I don't know the station if I heard it, but I just can't recall now. He went to the Growan, no one about, and he looked through in the window and he saw her on the bed, and he thought she looked queer, so he never went in. He went back. He thought she was dead, and he thought, if I go in, I'll be accused of the murder. And he went back to where he worked, on this station. But sure enough, it came out that he had been there. Someone knew he went there, and the police made inquiries, and he was arrested for her murder. And she was finally buried, and he was committed for trial for her murder, and it went to Sydney Court of Sessions. But before the final trial came out, they had the body exhumed, And the doctors went over it again, and they finally said that she died in a fit. That she hadn't been killed, she died in a fit. And he was acquitted. But if they hadn't found that, brought that in, he could have been charged with the murder,
Yes.
just on circumstantial evidence.
Do you know anything else about the Growan or any characters from the Growan?
No, I don't.
No. What about Angledool? Did you know much about Angledool?
No, not very much at all. There was a doctor in Walgett at the time, a very good doctor, and the Hammonds had a hotel at Angledool. I think it would be in the New Town. And old Mrs. Hammond got very ill, so they had to send into Walgett for this doctor, and he came out, and Mr. Hammond had gone down to the Old Town for something, and there was only George at the hotel, and the doctor came and he said, "I'm Dr. So-and-so. You called me to see Mrs. Hammond," but he said, "Before I see her," he said, "my fee is £70. "Oh yes, that's what they did. So, no, that's another case I could tell you about. He demanded his fee anyhow, and George said, "Well, Father's down at the Old Town, could you wait? Could you see Mother now?" And no, he wouldn't. He wanted to check first. So Mrs. Hammond, they had to take her into Walgett, and they operated on her, and just before the operation was over, she died. But there was a school teacher, small school teacher along, I don't know whether he was on Old Bangor Station or where, but his wife took ill in a very bad way, and they sent him to Walgett to this doctor, and he came out and he met the school teacher, and he said, "I'm Dr. So-and-so." He said, "You wanted me to see your wife, but before I see her, my fee is £70. So the school teacher said, "I'm sorry, doctor, you're too late, my wife's dead."
They were tough.
Yeah.
Some doctors are like that today.
Well, they are, true.
Unfortunate,
Yes,
isn't it? It's a
yes.
tragedy, really.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
But
What about the school? Can you remember anything about the school in the days that you were there?
no. The school, yes, what am I saying? The McNamara's. McNamara was the school teacher then, and funnily enough, I knew he was a McNamara because I'd gone to Darlinghurst Public School when I was a child, and the headmistress was a Miss McNamara, and he was so much like her, I knew that he must have been related to her. So I asked him, and he said yes. He said there were 5 members of the family, school teachers, and this, our principal was his sister, elder sister, and they were there for some time. He was a good teacher. Well, then after McNamara, we got a Mr. and Mrs. Oh, I've forgotten their name. I can see him. He was a very nice chap, but too easygoing with the children, and they didn't learn much, and they played up and that sort of thing. Well, he went, and then we got a Mr. and Mrs. Watson, and Watson came there from Auburn, and he had terrible fights with the mothers, trying to pull the kids into line, because he said the other man had spoiled them, you know. But he finally got everything his way, and they were very good teachers there. But because when I was the last time in Lightning Ridge, I was surprised to know that the children went all the way into Walgett to the high school, you know.
It's massive. There's amounts of children that come
Yes.
from the district into Walgett, the whole district.
Yes.
Walgett's got a very big complex high school.
Yes.
At the moment at Lightning Ridge, just for the primary school, there's something like 14 teachers.
Oh, would you ever think it? Would
Yes,
you
would
ever think of it?
Yeah.
Yes. Just imagine.
Could you describe to us what it was like on mail day at Lightning Ridge, and how many mails a week you got, and where did they come from? What was it like?
Well, we used to get the mail about 3 times a week, and if it rained, it was brought out on a pack horse.
From where?
From Walgett
From
to
Walgett.
Lightning Ridge, yes. Always on pack horse if they couldn't get the truck through, you know.
And when the mail got to Lightning Ridge, everybody went up to the post
Oh,
office?
you had to, yes. It was sorted and put into the boxes and slots, you know, and every winter called there any mail today. Yes, yes.
Very interesting. And what about newspapers?
Oh, we had no papers then. I've got some copies of the Lightning Ridge Flash here now that my girls have given me. But,
What about incoming newspapers?
oh, well, you could always buy the Sydney papers.
You had a news shop at Lightning Ridge?
No, there wasn't. The grocer used to sell
I
them.
see.
Mm.
Now, there was a billiard room at Lightning Ridge in those
Yes,
days too. Can you remember anything
Oh,
about
Frank Elliott had the first one for many years.
Can you describe it? What did the building look like?
Just a galvanised iron building with the 2 or 3 tables in it. Then later on in years, they built another one on the same side, which is opposite the hotel, next door to Mrs. Ma's boarding house. I was trying to think of the other German, Otto Marquardt lived there too. Do you know that name? Yes. And there was a billiard room next to us. I don't know how many billiard tables, because I was never in, you see. I mean, women then weren't free to go anywhere as they are today.
No, that's
Yes.
And what about public halls?
Well, there used to be one opposite the hotel on the same side, on that corner.
There's a motel there today called the
Yes.
Black Opal
well,
Motel.
well, where the Black Opal Hotel, there was a little hall, and Reddish, Mr. Reddish that had the hotel, he built it. And he did something he built in something that I've never seen before nor since, and it was a marvellous idea. Behind the seats, he built about the flooring up behind the seat, on a level with the seat. Behind the seat, and the mothers could take their children with a rug and a pillow, and the kids could sleep there, and the mothers could dance, and the fathers dance their hearts out, and not worry about leaving the children, or couldn't go because they had nowhere to leave the children. They could take the children to the dance, which we did, and we could dance there till 1 and 2 in the morning and have a jolly good time.
Tremendous.
Yes.
Talking about dancing, was Circus Gully still in use when you first went there?
Never heard of it. It wasn't there.
Well, I believe that Circus Gully was where they danced up at Old Town, out on the flat. Put
Oh,
lanterns in the trees of a night.
I
and-
never heard of that, but they could have done, because I mean, you make the best of what you've got, don't you?
You certainly do.
Hmm.
Yes, yes. Well, Mrs. Darby, I think we've just about come to the end of our little story for the day.
Yes.
I want to thank you very kindly for what you've done for the Lightning Ridge Historical
Oh,
Society.
it's my pleasure.
And we invite
I
you to
only
come.
hope that it will be interesting.
Oh, I'm sure it will be interesting,
Yes.
and we hope to get more of you at Lightning Ridge later on.
I hope so, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.